So we were going to this dinner party, and normally you show up at a party and you don't know who's there, and it's like sometimes it's some good people and sometimes it's you're stuck with some duds. But this time the host actually said to everyone who was coming, and I'm using a fake name here. So Joe is dating someone new and will be bringing them. And it's like, okay, great, whatever. So we showed up at this party. It was a dinner party. Maybe 14 people were there. And walked in and I saw this like crowd of maybe 5 or 6 guys around this other person. And as I got closer, it was like, oh, that's who he's dating. And it was a guy around 25 years old. And this Joe, was in his 60s. And when I saw this crowd of guys around him, and they were all doing that, like, brushing against him, laughing so they could touch his chest, kind of bumping into his thigh, my whole body just bristled up because it just kind of brought me back to me being that age. And, I've said this before, I had some really good years. I was working in front of a camera. So I understood this.
I find that so disrespectful to the person who brought that person as a date, regardless of what their dynamic was. Because you have, somebody made a disclaimer and said, oh, he's bringing a new date. And then you have all these people hovering around him like flies on shit. And it's so disrespectful to the other person.
And yet, and this is something I saw when I was this age, the guy whose date it was standing there with this like big grin on, like, yeah, this is what I got. And I'm like, that was, to me, disrespectful to this poor 25-year-old, which I also understand his mindset of like, this is awesome. Everyone thinks I'm amazing. I'm so beautiful. They all want to touch me. But then you go home and you're like, that was not right.
Where was the guy whose date this was? Where was he when all this grossness was happening?
He was around. He was over there watching all of this, soaking it all in, because that
was his brooch.
Exactly, yeah. Right? And that's the thing, like, I understand, like, 5 years between you, 10 years, okay, great. But as it keeps creeping up to, like, this, a 40-year age difference, it's just, I just don't understand, like, what do they have in common? What are they talking about? Why is this attraction there? And yet, again, I was in that position, and I saw so many friends of mine who were going down that pathway and going with the older man because there was a payoff. There was, just as this man was getting his payoff of like, attaboy, look at who you got, and his ego was being stroked, normally there is that exchange of like, okay, this young guy's probably traveling around the world, maybe he's got a job through this, maybe he's got some money, but to what end,
That's a tough question, because I think on some level all relationships are transactional.
Yes.
I mean, they just are, regardless of what the age difference is. So if it works for the two of them, awesome sauce.
Well, that's the thing. If it works for the two of them, and if they are both happy in this, I have to tell you this too. I'm telling a lot of stories about myself when I was younger, but I remember coming out to LA. I was still living in New York. I came out to do a job, and at the time I was, a lot of people were kind of pushing me in different directions, go meet this person, do this, whatever. There was this one man who was very helpful to me, and I would meet him in his office, and, in conversations, he would be like, so when you move out here, where are you going to move? And I'm like, oh, I want to live in the Hollywood Hills and the Bird Streets, because that was my favorite area. And I want to have, I'm going to drive a black Mercedes convertible, because, in the 80s, that was the car or whatever. And anyway, that was just conversational stuff. So one time I had flown out, I had this big meeting, and then he said, well, why don't you meet me for dinner? And I have a business transaction to talk to you about. And I was like, oh, something happened. Somebody wants, something. and to meet him at the Ivy. And again, the 80s, you were either at the Polo Lounge making your deals or you're at the Ivy on Robertson making your deals. So I met him for dinner, order, whatever, and he takes out his briefcase and then brings out a contract. And I was like, a contract? This is something big, you know, like, whoa. So then he starts reading what this contract is. And it was the house on one of the bird streets, the car, the little black Mercedes convertible. And then it was what I needed to do in order to have those things. And it was, first it started like how many events I had to go with him monthly.
How old was this person?
Then it turned sexual.
How old was this person?
He was in his 50s.
Okay.
I was in my 20s. But when that happened, that's when I realized this is a business.
Like I said, it's all relationships
it's
are
transactional. Exactly. And yes, there are plenty of people, females and males, who are signing those contracts. I didn't even finish dinner. I excused myself. I said, this isn't my world. And I just got up and left. But yeah, that is out there. So yeah, so maybe younger people, if you're getting something and this other person is getting their ego stroked or whatever they need to get from this, great. But it has to be a healthy relationship. Hey, thanks for watching our show. Hit like and subscribe so every time we have a new show, you'll be notified. Thanks again.